The question is, as on the order paper. Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And may I make it plain from the outset, I am a proud member of the Labour and Trade Union movement and very happy to declare the support that I've received from all three trade unions in the rail industry. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to debate Southern Rail and the Gibb report. However, it should be noted that this debate should have taken place 6 months ago, when the report was finished and presented to the Secretary of State. Unfortunately, the Transport Secretary decided to sit on the report for 6 months and wait until after the general election before publishing it, denying this place and, most importantly, denying passengers the opportunities to scrutinise this assessment into the Southern Rail fiasco. The Secretary of State shouldn't bury reports until after a general election, when passengers deserve the opportunity to see the findings immediately. And just last week, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Association of British Commuters went to the High Court seeking a judicial review of the government's handling of Southern, motivated by the Transport Secretary's refusal to assess the force majeure claims of Southern, who are requesting that they not be found in breach of their contract for their abysmal performance, the worst in the country. These claims were made in April 2016, over a year ago, and the High Court have now ordered the Secretary of State to produce a report into Southern Rail within 14 days. Long-suffering passengers shouldn't have to resort to crowdfunding for legal action to seek accountability, and the Secretary of State should not have to be dragged kicking and screaming by the High Court to do the job and been appointed to do so. I'm very happy to do so.
Would you just confirm that we won the case?
Perhaps he'd like to confirm that he's been ordered to produce the report within 14 days by the High Court, that he wouldn't have done it otherwise. So who won that one?
And crucially, Mr Deputy Speaker, the section of the Gibb report which would have been most informative, recommendations regarding the GTI's franchise agreement, Appendix 9, has been redacted. Where is it? What is there to hide? So the Secretary of State has prevented us from seeing the part of the report which would give us greater details on the botched franchise design for which his department is responsible, the nature of the agreement with the GTR, which has been cloaked in secrecy, and the changes that Gibb has recommended. That is to say, the Secretary of State has redacted the parts of the report that would present the greatest political difficulties for his government if they were released. It's absolutely right that he highlights that it isn't just the issues of industrial relations. The Gibb report does clearly identify failures to accurately assess the numbers of available drivers, to train and recruit enough drivers, anticipate turnover with any accuracy, plan for the impact of infrastructure enhancements, account for changes in Network Rail, account for timetable expansion, get the right trains in the right places, and cater for growth in demand and overcrowded stations. But turning to the issue of industrial action, Mr Deputy Speaker, I don't recall the Transport Secretary having done anything other than oppose every single piece of industrial action. And it's absolutely wrong for the Secretary of State to attack the men and women who operate our railways whilst washing his hands entirely of the collapse in industrial relations. The book, happy to.
For giving way, the ASLEF drivers have just been offered a 26% pay increase, taking their pay from $51,000 to $63,000 for a 4-day week. Now, if that isn't a generous offer, I'd like to know what is.
Now, just lay bare a complete failure to understand what this is about. It isn't about money. It's about the proper running of our railways so that we have a safe and accessible railway. If members opposite could just get their heads round that, and they may find ourselves working towards this view. No, he's had a go. You can sit down. The buck stops with the government. Tory ministers who had designed and awarded the franchise are responsible for the shambolic delivery of enhancement works and have directed this unnecessary industrial dispute. Happy to.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable member for giving way. He may be aware that I took a Transport Select Committee group to view the video operation, and it was entirely clear to us that you could see when a passenger was coming on or off the train. But ultimately, it doesn't matter what I think or what he thinks. It's the independent safety rail regulator who's confirmed it's safe.
Absolutely delighted he's raised that issue, because I'm going to come on to that very point in a few minutes' time. We all know too well the idiosyncratic approach of the Secretary of State to workers and unions, but even so, the handling of industrial relations with regards to Southern has been particularly appalling, and relations aren't helped by the antagonistic behaviour of GTR, the Department for Transport and government ministers. In February 2016, a senior civil servant at the DfT, Peter Wilkinson, Director of Passenger Services, told a public meeting in Croydon, "Over the next 3 years, we're going to be having punch-ups, and we will see industrial action, and I want your support. I'm furious about it, and it has got to change. We have got to break them. They've all borrowed money to buy cars and got credit cards. They can't afford to spend too long on strike, and I will push them into that place. They have to decide if they want to give a good service or get the hell out of my industry." Does the right honourable member honestly believe that threatening to drown ordinary workers in credit card debt is the right way to go about implementing staffing change? The Transport Secretary has repeatedly attempted to distance himself from industrial action, claiming that it was a matter for the company, despite the unusually close relationship between him, his officials and GTR. This has never been a credible claim, and the Gibb report confirmed the suspicions of the Transport Secretary was deeply involved in the industrial dispute, despite his claims otherwise. Gibb said that the Secretary of State is already determining the strategic direction of this dispute. But in similar disputes on Transpennine Express and ScotRail, agreements were reached that avoided further disruption and prevented industrial action.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. ScotRail, the technology is there, but even in exceptional circumstances, a driver cannot operate the train despite 30% of the network operating in that manner. What kind of a deal is that worth with new technology that you can't use?
Well, it just demonstrates what you can achieve if you sit down and have an intelligent conversation with people. But where there's a willingness to talk on all sides, it is clear that agreements can be reached that benefit passengers. To put it simply, the Secretary of State's militant, anti-worker, anti-trade union stance has significantly worsened industrial relations and had a devastating impact on passenger services. And while I'm at it, he's got to come up with evidence for his allegation that leaders of the Labour Party conspired in the way he said he did, because it's a complete and utter fantasy, and he knows it. And he shouldn't come to that dispatch box and just make things up that he knows are not right.
So, Mr Deputy Speaker, if his analysis of the industrial dispute is correct, can he explain why the Labour Council and mayors on Merseyside have taken exactly the same approach as the government to this issue?
Well, that's not accurate. I'll tell him why. Because if it wasn't for the stitch-up with Serco and Abellio taking 17 million quid out of the deal and taking 5 that we could use to have a guard in every train, we wouldn't have the problem. So it's again, you just serve this up to your mates, you do your deals with these people extracting the value out of our railway system. No, absolutely not. It's important, Mr Deputy Speaker, to point out that the Gibb report itself makes no assessment of the merits and demerits of driver-only operation. However, despite a lack of assessment, Chris Gibb does make it clear that he supports DOO and thinks that any industrial action is wrong. But I'd like the Secretary of State to reflect on this following passage from Appendix 1, no, sit for a minute, of the Gibb report. We've undertaken this project for CLGR Limited, a consultancy company owned and operated by my family and I, and CLGR Limited has been contracted to Govia Thameslink Railway as facilitated by the DfT. Discussions have been held under the terms of a confidentiality agreement between CLGR Limited and GTR. So there we have it, Mr Deputy Speaker. Chris Gibb is contracted to Govia, the very company he's supposed to be reporting on. And it's more than just he who pays the piper. Surely, even this Secretary of State can see this blatant latest conflict of interest. Where is the independence in this report? It's just another stitch-up. What is it with the DFT, their senior civil servant who previously told the world that he wanted unions out of his industry, in addition has his own consultancy company, FCP I believe it is, to advise the parent company of Govia, the very company which was then handed the Thameslink Southern and Great Northern concession on a £1.2 billion a year gold plate. This government would refuse to recognise a conflict of interest if it got up and bit them on the gluteus maximus. Labour, like the staff who understand and operate our rail network, the passenger groups who have been protesting and have been motivated to take legal action, and disability charities, simply do not agree with the assumption that de-staffing and de-skilling our railways is a positive step. Despite first being introduced over 30 years ago, DOO is only in use on a third of the national rail network. It was originally introduced on 3 or 4 car trains at a time of declining passenger numbers. With passenger numbers having hugely increased in recent years, it's now being proposed that DOO will be introduced on trains with as many as 12 cars. And in the last 15 years, Mr Deputy Speaker, passenger numbers on Southern have increased by 64%, from 116 million to 191 million a year. This enormous rise in numbers means that at the platform train interface, there are inevitably increased risks to passenger safety, as anyone who travels on Southern services is able to see.
Thank you very much for giving way. Can the honourable gentleman explain why the same union has agreed to 12-car train driver-controlled operation on Thameslink? The same company.
Well,
the same line.
That's somewhat curious, isn't it, that people are being criticised for adhering to a previously achieved agreement, but looking at the situation as it is now, and quite rightly want to look at it properly. Labour believes passengers are more at risk if they no longer have the guarantee of a safety-critical member of staff on their train to prevent something going wrong or assist when something does go wrong. The view of Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Railways, Ian Prosser, has been laid out in the Office for Rail and Road report, GTR Southern Railways Driver-Only Operation. That was published earlier this year. Mr Prosser is clear that there are obvious caveats to safe operation of DOO. These are namely legal levels of lighting, that'd be a good start, suitable equipment, suitable procedures and competency of the relevant staff, none of which have been adequately satisfied even by his own assessment. I'll have to give away.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way, and if union members are concerned about those points that he raised, why will they not get back round the table to discuss those and resolve this situation, call off the overtime ban and call off any ballot for strike action?
Well, quite simply because they couldn't get in the door. Because when they were holding talks at the TUC, as the honourable gentleman quite rightly pointed out, it was an attempt to divide and conquer. Typical Tory trick to keep the critically important trade union out of the discussion in the first place. Had he had a real intent in this regard, he'd have done as honourable members have said already, he'd have got everybody around the table and got on with resolving the dispute. Yeah, well, he says from a sedentary position that it's the TUC that oversaw. They did their level best to try to bring this to a conclusion, but not because of the assistance of the DFT and this minister. It's because he deliberately excluded the relevant parties. But sadly, Mr Deputy Speaker, the inference that the government apparently seeks to draw from the report that I was talking about, that is all well and there is in effect no cause for concern over safety, does nothing to assist the process of resolution. Indeed, this Rail Safety and Standards Board has been reluctant to describe DOO as definitively safe, saying that DOO does not create additional undesired events, but may increase the likelihood of an event occurring or increase the severity of its consequence. By the way, Mr Deputy Speaker, you can no longer find that on the website. I wonder why. And at a time when there are increased risks of terrorist attacks and a spike in hate crimes, it seems foolish in the extreme to prioritise removing trained staff from services. Well, the safe management of a train difficulties arise is also key. A case in point was the derailment. It'll come in after this point. You can have a pop. A case in point was the derailment that occurred near Watford Junction on the 16th of September last year. After the train hit a landslip caused by torrential rain, the guard evacuated the train when the driver was injured in the incident and trapped in the cab and not capable of doing it. If such an accident were to occur on a DOO service, the safety of hundreds of passengers could be compromised. And why is it that it takes a catastrophe to bring this government to its senses when dealing with the issues of safety, rather than just completely wanting to compromise on safety at every turn? I'll happily give away the Secretary of State.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can he confirm that it is the case that today on Southern Rail there are more on-train staff than there were before the dispute started? And is he actually saying that his Labour Party policy that if a member of staff is delayed, that the previous arrangement whereby the train could simply carry on running should stop and that train should automatically be cancelled and the passengers turfed out on the platform?
Tell him what Labour Party policy is to ensure that there's a second safety critically trained member of staff on that train. It means that they've got the appropriate training and they're not going to be outsourced or sold short on training, which is exactly what this government wants to do. And the changes by the Secretary of State would also be retrograde for disabled passengers, Mr Deputy Speaker, who would see their independence wound back. Without a guaranteed second member of staff on board, the ability of passengers with accessibility requirements to turn up and go is severely restricted, requiring passengers to make arrangements 24 hours in advance. Southern passengers have previously been left stranded on station platforms because on some services, as there was no onboard supervisor on the DOO service, there was no one to assist them onto a train. Okay,
I thank you very kindly for giving way. He's been very patient. Is it not the case that if passengers are disabled, they are required to book 24 hours in advance a completely separate service? Because a conductor can't leave a train and get somebody over the platform and off. So he's confusing the matter completely.
I think he rather makes my point for it. Why on earth are we discriminating against disabled people who want to have the same freedom as able-bodied people to turn up to a railway station and carry on with their journey as every able-bodied person can? No. And before the Secretary of State claims... No, I'm not giving away again. Sit down. And before the Secretary of State claims that this is a conspiracy theory cooked up by ASLEF or the RMT, this is a quote from a GTR person. There is no cast-iron guarantee that passengers with accessibility requirements can spontaneously board a train in the assumption that there would be a second member of staff on board every train. And here's another one, this time a representative from a train operating company looking to introduce DOO, who was quoted in a recent edition of Modern Railways on the advantages of trains being able to go into service with only the driver on board. The good thing would be that all of the regular passengers would still be carried. It would only be the wheelchair users who wouldn't be able to travel. So the Secretary of State will be well aware of the numerous stories of disabled passengers being left stranded due to the staffing changes he's forcing through, including that of Sandra Nye, 56, of Highfields Towering, who was left stranded in the freezing cold for more than 2 hours waiting for a southern service on Hampden Park's train platform near Eastbourne. And because there was nobody to help her onto the train, Sandra said the whole situation was horrible and embarrassing, and it is unforgivable when I had booked assistance 48 hours in advance. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, everyone should be able to use rail services, and providing assistance to those who need it should be a top priority to ensure good quality of life. The Transport Secretary ought to be ashamed that he's making our railways less, not more accessible for disabled people. And I firmly believe that the Labour Party, the passenger groups, the staff and the disability charities are in the right when we say that the objective of the government should be to make our railways safer and more accessible, not riskier and more exclusive. And the Gibb report paints a picture of a chaotic relationship between Network Rail, the Department of Transport and Govia Thameslink, none of which have sufficient oversight or responsibility, leading to poor performance on Southern. Gibb says that none of the parties in the system share the same incentives or objectives, and he recommends that the custodian of the overall system integrity be better identified. And whilst these criticisms are clearly true for Southern, they are an accurate summary with what is wrong with how our railways are managed in general. Labour has consistently highlighted that privatisation and fragmentation of the railway has prevented the necessary oversight and responsibility needed to deliver upgrades and run efficient services, which is why, as a part of our plans to take rail into public ownership, we will establish a new national body to serve as a guiding mind for the publicly owned railway to avoid the chaos over which this government has presided. There's no need for the government to prolong the suffering of passengers any longer. This industrial dispute is but one part of an unedifying scene, but basic managerial inefficiency characterises this woeful service. It is within the Secretary of State's power to end the industrial dispute tomorrow, and he can do it by calling off his plans to expand driver-only operation and by guaranteeing a second safety-critical crew member on every train, and he should do so immediately, as was done with East Coast Main Line, which delivered the lowest fare rises and highest passenger satisfaction of any rail service in the country and returned over £1 billion to the Treasury. It's time to admit defeat and take Southern back under public control as a public service. The privatised franchise railway system, allowing all comers, including state-owned rail companies from across the globe, with the bizarre exception of the United Kingdom itself, to extract profits from passengers and taxpayers alike, has had its day. The government should wake up and recognise the chaos that they have created and do the right thing and bring our railways back under public control and ownership, and if they don't, a Labour government will. Yeah.